What's up, everybody? Welcome back to this episode of Hamilton Icons. I am your host, Justin Little, and today I'm joined by Igor from Kingswood Engineers. Igor, thank you so much for coming in.
It is a pleasure to see you again.
I appreciate you coming again because we did have one of the most trending reels on my social media anyways, was of you talking, and we talked about the legal
I remember
use.
the politics around it. That was a good conversation.
Yeah.
We might need to revisit it because there's been some pretty big changes.
Yeah. And you know what? There has been, because that was probably about a year ago. I would think that we did it at least a year ago. So definitely some changes, but we can touch on that. I think first, let's do a little bit of introduction of who you are. So if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your business, Kingswood Engineers.
Yeah, I'd love to. So Igor from Kingswood Engineers, we're a structural engineering firm that specializes in residential building permits. So anytime someone's doing an interior renovation or adding a second story, or like we mentioned, doing a accessory dwelling unit, we're there to help guide in terms of zoning, do the architectural drawings, as well as the structural engineering, and of course, help with dealing with the city.
That's the big part, dealing with the city. I feel like that's the biggest pain in the butt for people. So you're kind of like a one-stop shop for anybody that's looking to do renovations that include any sort of, I guess, engineering or
Yeah, exactly. So
components.
our specialty really has become the residential stuff. So a lot of companies focus on commercial and residential. Because it's my passion, I've decided that we were going to focus primarily on the residential side. So anytime people are doing renovations, we're really the first stop. And what I like to tell people is the optimal process, if you haven't done this before, is step one, you engage a designer. We come up with a plan and drawings, and then you reach out to contractors, because then they're able to provide you with a really good quote because they're quoting what's on the page, versus you first going to a contractor, them saying, well, it'll be between 20 and 40,000 because I don't know what's required from a structural component, let's say. So
That's one of the biggest things that we hear. Yeah, when you have somebody come in and quote jobs, because I see it all the time, people come in on properties and they quote it and they're like, well, it depends what the engineer says. They can't give an exact estimate. So it's nice that you're able to do that.
Yeah.
I even saw on your website you have the part about, if you've ever said, I'm thinking about opening this wall, give us a call or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the exact word, but
it's exactly
a good
that.
way to
So
put it.
what we found, because we've done this so much now, we have a really good idea of what's going to be required, particularly for the type of home. So whether it's a 1960s bungalow or a 1990s Mattamy home, they've been built so similarly that we really know, yeah, this is going to be your problems. HVAC is going to be in this wall, or that rear window is going to be a problem because of fire separation stuff. Things like that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people overlook the HVAC in walls scenario. I think you don't realize how much is actually running through. So even though it's not a structural wall, people are surprised by how much is actually running through that wall.
The best way I can describe it is you're not allowed to put HVAC and plumbing on your exterior walls. So the builder loves to use that center wall for the mechanical. And unfortunately, that's the wall that everybody wants to get rid of, if we're talking about wall removals. But interior renovations in general, typically that wall is chock full of HVAC and plumbing,
Yeah, and I can see that in the bungalows too, like you mentioned, like the 60s bungalows. That's probably one of the most popular houses that you're taking walls out of, is that old compartmentalized layout. How'd you get into this field?
Into engineering in particular, or residential?
Both.
Oh, let's start from the back. So
when you were a little boy.
Yeah. My mother is actually a structural engineer. So in terms of when I was deciding what to study, it seemed like the obvious choice, because she always said, look, if you do something difficult, you can always transfer later. So I actually wanted to be a carpenter.
Yeah?
Yeah. Oh, I love working with my hands. And my parents said, that's fine. But, just be prepared to do some knee surgeries at 40. And it's turned out, so a lot of friends that went into the trades, it's a big problem that no one talks about. Like, everyone complains about the cost of contractors, but nobody sees those downsides. Like, you're using your body. Like, that's a hard job. And I think people forget that, and sometimes, discredit the price contractors are paying
Oh
to
yeah.
actually do the
The
work.
wear and tear on their bodies, right? Some of these
Yeah.
guys, you see them, they can't even walk. Like even some of those tile guys, especially people,
Yeah.
they're on their hands and knees all day. You only have a limited lifetime that you can really work doing that type of work,
Yeah,
right?
and so that was kind of the deciding factor. So I went into engineering, and then I started to do telecommunications engineering. So a lot of steel design and concrete work. So the cell phone towers that you see, I spent a long time building those out. And then eventually, I had a friend who said, so when we opened up this company, we were doing a lot of telecommunications work. And then I had a friend who was doing a lot of renovations and said, "Hey, Igor, I really need some help on this side." And I would say to them, "Look, I'd love to, but I'm pretty busy trying to look for clients." And then at a certain point, he said, "Igor, I'm a client." And that's when we started to dabble into this. And now, I don't know, I think it's 8, 10 years maybe a little around there, yeah, that we've been on the residential side. And every year we started to do a little less telecommunication stuff and a little more residential, mainly because it ended up being like I said, this really is what I'm interested in, and also a very pleasant component of it. I'm sure you see it too. On the telecommunication side, it's all big companies and it's all EBITDA focused, and we need it quickly. Thank you, and can you do it better next time? And so your staff is not traumatized, but it's very difficult. And then we started to do the residential stuff, and the feedback was, "Oh my God, Igor, I love this. Thank you. The team is fantastic." And we started to notice, this is a much nicer place to be. You're helping people um, achieve their dreams. Like, it's pretty important, a home
Yeah.
for a person. So for the last 5, 6 years, I think, we just kept doing more and more of the residential to the point now where the entire team almost exclusively focuses on residential. And as I mentioned, like, we made that commitment to say, okay, we're not going to do commercial projects and this and this. We're going to be subject matter experts on the residential side, particularly on the renovation side, the additions and the ADUs. Yeah.
And that helps to kind of niche in like that. Like I
Yeah.
used to do all kinds of real estate. Oh, do you do this? Yeah. Do you do this? Yeah. Yeah. Like you're always saying yes. But then over time, I guess I went hard into residential and
Yeah.
said, you know what? It's just, that's what I want to be. Because similar thing, like when you deal with investors, okay, that's great. They're going to do like maybe multiple deals, stuff like that. But it's not as much fun as when you're dealing with a family buying a house. I mean, it's almost a little more stressful in
Yeah.
some situations, but when people get that house, like that is exciting. And I could see it on your end, especially you're helping people make these dramatic improvements to what is probably their dream home,
Yeah.
right? So they see that result on the other side and it's just really exciting for them. So I get
Yeah.
that aspect of it for sure.
Very true. And it's a bit understated, but as a refugee, the ability for us to say, like, "Hey, we can do this, but, like, we can extract, like, half the cost if we do it like this, and I really want you guys to be able to port that money over into," like you said, the dream kitchen or that I get a big kick out of. So, like, really designing it for that best value for money, I've ended up just naturally focusing on that, and I found that people do appreciate it quite a bit, because as you know, like, there's 10 different ways to do something. You can do it standardized and expensive, or you can really try to find solutions that make it easy for contractors, make it a lot more affordable. And
Hmm.
that's the biggest benefit I've found of specializing. So because we do this type of project so often, we're able to really hone in on what's a cost-effective way to underpin a foundation, let's say. We used to do it one way, which was the kind of standard or the typical. And just with working with good contractors, you start to get feedback. "Hey, Igor, just so you know, if we did it like this, we can save 3 days," which translates to, a couple thousand
Yeah,
dollars.
for sure.
So that's some of the biggest benefits that I've seen over the last few years, where we've been really able to provide a very good solution just by having seen it 10, 15, 20 times before.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's an exciting field for sure. And you're kind of necessary in any renovation because I think a lot of people don't, I don't know, people don't realize how much you need permits for and what
Mhm.
you actually might need engineer drawings for when you're doing renovations, even if it's like, you want to dig downstairs to put a second unit in the
Yeah.
basement or, I mean, the wall removal is the biggest one. But you pretty much need a permit for, I say, almost any of the work that you do in a property, right?
It's actually really easy. So you need a permit when safety is concerned. So safety structurally, safety from a mechanical standpoint, or safety from a plumbing standpoint, meaning like gases leaking in, or mold coming in because someone didn't do the vapor barrier correctly on your home. So anytime safety is concerned, the city expects you to get a permit. You definitely don't need a permit when you are doing the cosmetic stuff, flooring, changing out your windows, obviously paint, but also even updating your washrooms and kitchens. If the fixtures are staying in the same location, the city doesn't actually require a permit for that, which is pretty important because a lot of people, let's say you are in that 1960s bungalow and you've got that 5x8 washroom. If you're keeping the tub at the back and the toilet and sink where it was, you actually don't need a permit for that, and that's legal, and that's a nice thing. But for anything, particularly when we're, of course, structural stuff, when we're removing a wall, even if it's not load bearing, the city would like a professional opinion on that so that you're not guessing. So we come in, we do this actually quite a bit. So even if the wall isn't load bearing, I will come in. Actually, I've got a site visit today. I come in, I review the structural components, and then I provide a stamped engineering letter to say you're okay to remove this wall, because I know, let's say it's got trusses or the way they framed it out, it's not load bearing. Yeah.
Mhm. Speaking of the trusses, you just said it. I don't know if you remember that message I sent you about a month ago, that one house that was a new construction home. It was
Yep.
2 years old, and the trusses were actually snapped,
Yeah. Yeah.
engineered ones, right? How does stuff like that pass? Like, would that be something at install, or would that be something that can happen over time?
Generally, majority of the truss failures, and I don't know if anyone watches the inspections on YouTube out of the States, a lot of it is during installation. So the trusses come from the factory, they get banged up, and then they install them. Nobody bothers to check because we're trying to get new builds done so quickly.
Yeah.
Or often, installation gets sprayed in, and then it's hard for an inspector to really do a good
I
due
can see it,
diligence
yeah.
on trusses. So my guess is often it's during construction that happens. But yeah, it can happen over time, but it's not likely.
It is crazy to see that kind of stuff in new construction, eh? Some of the stuff that gets cast, but
It is and it isn't. So from what I've seen is everybody's under the gun. Construction as a field is extremely custom. Even on the new builds, you're still doing it on site. You're still bringing in various sub-trades. Um, so if you think of it like let's say a car, imagine trying to build everybody's car in their garage. How expensive would it be to
Mhm.
bring out the tools? How time consuming it is. So because this is one of the few industries that hasn't standardized or become a production type thing, it's really unbelievable how custom everything is. People are still building it for structural. Then the mechanical guy comes in. Then, you know, so when you consider all of that times potential errors at every step, because essentially it's custom, I think we got to give inspectors a bit of slack, or say to them, you have 3 days to inspect this thing to check for everything. Which
Yeah.
again, we don't have the luxury to do that because we need these homes. So I agree, it is scary. The nice thing is the Ontario Building Code, which is based on the National Building Code of Canada, puts in a big margin of safety so that even if something is broken, like let's say one truss, the webbing in the truss, the other ones can still take on that load. So what we talk about on the engineering side is we've got a service failure and then an ultimate failure, meaning, okay, now the floors are too squishy to be reused, but it still can hold the weight, so it's still safe. So I think the system works fairly well. It's complicated, so it's easy to criticize, like we were
Mhm.
talking about before the podcast. But yeah, I think it's remarkable how well it runs for how complicated everything is.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Like you said, it technically is kind of custom, right? Like we have every house they're building might have a niche here or a bump out here or a window or something that was added that actually changes the structure of it. And then you have them trying to figure it out on site,
Yeah.
right?
Well, even like you're building it on site. Imagine the car if you were to build that on site.
Yeah.
A new
That's a really good point. Would they get built in factories? I hear people are
standardized.
site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bringing their own tools. It's raining. It's, so
It's a Friday afternoon.
it's a hard thing to do. And actually, yeah, we should talk about this. So we're starting to see, we're working with one company called Axe Building. And they are focused on trying to implement some sort of standardization so that they can build the assemblies in a factory and then kind of bring it on site. I think there's a lot of promise in that. And if we have any hope of getting to the amount of housing that we need, I think that's where it needs to go.
Yeah, it's like prefab homes, right? It's such
Yeah,
a
yeah,
that could solve so many issues with I mean, if we're still using the word housing crisis, right? Which I
yeah,
guess we're technically still in because just the demand is so high and the supply is not there. We're not building nearly enough homes. And
yeah,
there's not even enough it's just gonna be a huge issue because even now nobody's buying new construction right
yeah,
now, which is a huge problem. We have people that should be buying or typically would be buying now for houses that are going to close in 3 years or
yeah,
condos or towns, whatever it's going to be. But always buying those now because they're so expensive. So I think that we're actually going to see even more of a pressure point
yeah.
in 2 or 3 years because nobody bought because obviously the rates are high, new construction's expensive. I think it's going to get even worse in like 2, 3 years is going to be this pressure, like this pinch point.
So very much, even though the market has slowed down in terms of housing, we are still not at the bottom of that housing crisis because of what you said. So now the pre-construction market died, especially in Toronto, and I think it's gonna show up in a few years. But the real crisis still is the fact that we don't have the ability to build the amount of homes that we need to, and it's because it's all in effect custom. So until we get some sort of standardization where modules are built
Mhm.
or even they're prefabricated as an entire home, you can't address this. Think of any other product that we use,
Mhm.
whether it's the car that I mentioned or a cell phone or whatever it is. If we were building cell phones like we build homes, it would cost, 30,000 for a cell phone, and you'd be able to get it after 3 years of waiting because there's just not enough people to custom make your cell phone, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, the biggest change that I've seen since we spoke last time is that finally the municipalities have started to make real change in terms of we had zoning bylaws for every municipality that were essentially made, let's say the last big updates were in the 80s, which dealt a lot with the density and the setbacks and the parking requirements. And, when the lot costs $50,000 and the build out costs another 50,000, I think those zoning rules made sense. Now, when the lot, like, personally, we were looking at a lot in Grimsby, and it was coming out to, I think, like 700,000 for a regular lot. So I think
Is
that,
that a phone? That's a
yeah.
phone. That's okay. That'll stop
Should I
you.
get it?
It's up to you. Doesn't matter. No, it'll finish soon, right?
Yeah.
You can hardly hear it on here, I think.
Yeah.
But it's okay. But go on about the lots, prices of lots you were talking about.
So pricing of lots is totally disconnected from what it was when the zoning rules were made. Construction costs are totally disconnected from when those zoning rules were made. Um, so I think that's a big reason why it didn't work for a long time. Last 20 years, the zoning that prescribed, one home per acre or whatever it is, it just doesn't make sense. And that's why we got ourselves into this mess. I'm happy to report the overwhelming feedback from various municipalities is that they are on board now to really increase the density. Um, and I do mean really. So before, last few years, they said, yes, we can do it. Oh, but you need, 8 parking spots, which means an underground garage, which means every unit still costs, 600,000 to build, which means you still have to rent it out for $5,000 a month, which ultimately means it doesn't work. Now we're finally starting to see like, okay, this is a downtown corridor. Let's go easy on the parking. We'll allow this many units, which means your build out cost is going to be under, 150, let's say, per unit, which means you don't need 2,000, 3,000 for a one bedroom to make the numbers work. And the second you don't need that, people start building, and we're seeing that. We're genuinely seeing that, where $1,000 a month in rent makes the numbers work. And that's what we've been missing for a long time. So we work with a few investors, and over the last 2 years, we said, okay, the new rules are in. What can we build? And it kept looking like, okay, even if we do a triplex here, because that wasn't allowed before, it was a single family lot. Now it's allowed to be a triplex. Let's look at it. And you run the numbers and you're into it in, let's say, St. Catharines or Welland or whatever. You're into your triplex build out at around 1.2 million, which immediately tells you like this isn't going to work, right? The rent I have to charge to just cover the
Probably wouldn't be able to at that price right now with the way rates are.
Nobody
losing every month on that.
Everyone would be losing, or you're trying to ask someone to pay 2,500 in St. Catharines for a one bedroom. Like it didn't work. And so the really nice feedback over the last 3 months, I would say, is the cities are starting to say, okay, we're going to allow much greater density, which means the numbers per unit start to be much better. And funny enough, on that last podcast we did, there was a lot of feedback from people like, how dare you convert single-family dwellings into duplexes, triplexes?
There actually was people that were...
Yeah, but and I sympathize with that, but the crisis has happened because single-family dwellings were the only things that made money, which is why everyone just built those, which is why now you have to rent those out. And instead of rebalancing it to say, okay, here's a sixplex for all the rental, now there isn't a big need to rent out single-family dwellings, which opens it up for first-time home buyer. Like there's a certain fit for each building, and we didn't have that for a long time. So I think now when we start introducing, let's say the sixplex is going to be a really nice type of unit. As soon as you have sixplexes, the rent is significantly lower than for, a single family dwelling that has an upper unit and a lower unit. In Hamilton, that's become so popular that you will address the needs of a lot of people. And the second you do that, rents start to come down, and you start to see this rebalancing, so that a lot of those smaller homes, they get to stay for first-time home buyers or empty nesters or people who don't necessarily want to commit 99% of their disposable income to paying a mortgage.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm really encouraged. For a long time, we were, particularly me as the in-between between the property owner and the municipality, I was fighting with the planners to justify adding an ADU or adding a unit to a house. And the feedback was like, no, we want it limited to 400 square feet because it has to be accessory. And it's like, okay, but do we really want people living in
400 square feet?
400, 300 square feet. Oakville, actually, we just came across this last month. Oakville, even though they allowed the ADUs, I believe they're still restricting them to something like 300 or 400 square feet.
Oakville. What's going on?
Well, we know what's going on. It's Oakville. Having grown up there, I know exactly what's going on. But it's not in the interest of the people who live there. So this particular case was a homeowner said, I'd like to bring my mom in to live with me. I've got the budget. I want to make it nice for her. What's the best I can do? And we said, okay, well, she can live in a 400 square foot, bachelor in the backyard. And she's like, it's not exactly what I had in mind for my mom.
Yeah.
But there's no, and I specifically emailed the city and said, like, I'm not sure this is in the best interest of the people who live there. The person said, like, those are the rules still. So some municipalities will need to get dragged into these changes, but some have really adopted them. So a big shout out to Port Colborne.
Yeah.
We've been proposing some projects to them, and their feedback is we need to offer housing to people. Let's make this work. Let's make it work. What do we need to do? And it's been really collaborative. And to me, that's what needs to happen, because otherwise it's so expensive to get stuff built. So I'm really encouraged. The overall message of this is I'm really encouraged by the changes. Part of it is the Ontario government has started to just say you have to implement this. That's another topic. We'll come back to it, but and a big part of it is the municipalities really are embracing it. I would like to say it is scary for municipalities because they have to find ways to fund the infrastructure to support this density, and that's very difficult. So I do appreciate their challenge. I think in the past they've said this is very difficult, so we're not going to engage. Now they've realized, through the help of the Ontario government kind of ramming it down their throats, now they've realized that this is something that is needed, and they're starting to really think about it in a way to say, how can we accomplish this versus how can we prevent this from happening, which I am ecstatic about, and I think it'll be a difference maker in terms of getting projects started.
Yeah, that's really good. There's a lot of good points in there. Like, even when you're talking about the municipalities, the infrastructure aspect of it,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, it's easy to say to add more units, but our systems within the city might not be necessarily built to handle the increase in units in those municipalities, right? Like, how much are there's the sewers, the water service enough? Are there enough like sewer, like that kind of thing? What do they have to do to upgrade it to handle these additional units? And so it's easy to say, don't charge these development fees, don't charge these levies, whatever you're going to charge. But then who else are they going to charge? Then we end up getting stuff proposed like a double land transfer tax that's been proposed, right? That hopefully
it had to come from somewhere. I agree. The classic example, I don't know, like Hamiltonians are well aware. The classic example is even when they agree to spend a ton on infrastructure and it doesn't pan out, you're paying for it decades later.
Yes.
So Hamilton, the reason it's the classic example and the reason property tax is so high in Hamilton is because they did put a lot of money into infrastructure, Steel Town and all that. And then the industry went away, the infrastructure stayed, and now everyone's got, I would say, what do you think is the difference in property tax between Hamilton and all the other, like,
Okay,
2000?
man, even to take it to Burlington, like, you could have the same price house. Like, okay, to give you the example, like, I just sold a condo in Burlington. The property taxes they were in the 2000s for this condo in Burlington. Same condo in Hamilton that I went on a listing appointment for, the taxes were close to $6,000 for a condo, like an apartment style condo.
And the result that happened
over double
because infrastructure, they wanted to do the right thing and put in the right infrastructure for something that didn't pan out ultimately. So it's not just make the municipality put in the infrastructure. You have to do it in a way that's not going to cause property taxes to triple. So it's a very hard problem. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just really encouraged that we're in a spot where everyone realizes it's a problem we have to get over, because having people out on the street or forcing 20-year-olds to pay $4,000 a month in rent is a bigger problem, right?
It's a huge problem.
Yeah. So anyways, the overall message is I think we're headed in a really good direction, and people should feel good about that in Ontario, because for a long time I was getting a little worried about how we're going to possibly house everybody or house them in a way that allows them to take a vacation without going into debt.
Yeah. I'm just, oh my God, taking on so much more debt now and everything. But you're saying, so the provincial government's obviously getting behind this. There's a big push on it for all municipalities to increase these units. And so you're saying that they're kind of really putting the pressure on municipalities, and that's why they're starting to tackle this issue?
I could be wrong, so I'd love if the internet corrects me.
There's always somebody.
So
that'll be there.
And I think it's a really valuable thing of the internet. So I'll describe how I think it has gone. If someone has a better perspective, I'd love to hear it in the comments. So from my understanding, the provincial government created the Affordable Housing Act in 2009, I believe. And that's when we first saw the ADUs, some sort of attempt to circumvent how difficult it was to create a duplex.
Mm-hmm.
And they said every municipality has 3 years to implement this. Because every municipality makes their own zoning bylaws, it's very difficult for them to change, number one. But number two, they resist it like the plague. So in 2012, when every municipality was supposed to have some sort of ADU provision in their bylaws, when we were doing work in 2018, I know specifically we were still fighting with Thorold, and it was, again, me fighting with Thorold's legal department to say, you guys have to implement this, and them saying, tough, Igor, it's not in the zoning bylaws. I forget what the term was. They went to the tribunal to request, not arbitration, but it was like an appeal. Anyway, so every municipality was doing some form of pushing it or kicking the can down the road, let's say, because it's hard for them. Not saying it's not. And then 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the Ontario government finally said, well, we understand it's very difficult. The housing crisis has become even more difficult, so now we're going to force you to change. And that's when, you remember a few years ago, every municipality was saying, this is crazy, you can't do this to us.
Yeah.
That's the change. So rather than it being, well, the Ontario code says you have to do it, but everyone's stalling.
Yeah.
The Ontario government took this really hammer approach of saying, as of yesterday, it supersedes your municipal bylaws, which had a big change on the pace of this. And as difficult as that change was, I think maybe it was required. Each municipality is underfunded, doesn't have the resources to make these kind of big, forceful changes, and they needed someone to force them to say, you have to do it, find a way to do it. Now they have a mandate to say, okay, this is a huge issue. How do we make this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And so
it allows me to get around the usual processes of, like, say you're a counselor, you're in a ward that, it's all single family homes. You're going to get people coming to you complaining, like, we don't want this to go through because I don't want my neighbor renting out his basement.
Yeah.
I don't want the 2.5 story next door turning into 3 units and putting a unit in the back. Right. And that's where you run into the difficulties of the people that live in these, they have these properties already.
Yeah.
They don't want the change. Like, they don't want their neighborhood to change. They don't want these towers. They're worried about the shadows. Like, they're worried about, that kind of stuff. Right. And that by the government, like the provincial government, going and saying this is what we have to do, it actually, I think, makes it easier for the cities to implement it.
Yeah.
Right?
No, 100%. And I do want to talk about the, what do you call it? The not in my backyard attitude.
NIMBYism.
Yeah, it is valid so it is particularly valid when it's your home. And I do understand that. I also think once people experience it, the feedback often is fairly positive, because in a nicer neighborhood with nicer people renting, they are part of that community just as much. So it's not just an outsider coming in, being super disrespectful and, which is what everyone's worried about. But from what we've seen, when it's actually implemented properly, it's an addition to the community, especially also when we think of the people who are ultimately going to need to rent.
Mm-hmm.
They also deserve to live where the trees are and the parks are, and where there isn't congestion. So it is something that is difficult to kind of swallow when it's your own house. But if you think of the people who need to rent, I think as Canadians, Ontarians, this is a bridge we have to cross. So I don't know. It's difficult, but
well, there's going to be so much more demand for rent moving forward too. Like in Q4 of 2024, I was looking, because we get back-end stats to realtor.ca. We can see how things are performing, right?
Always great, right?
Yeah. Oh, it is. Well, you know what? We know what was shocking?
I'm just kidding.
More than half of the people using realtor.ca viewed properties for lease, properties for rent than properties for sale. So that just shows that more than half of the people that were searching in the last 3 months of 2024 were tenants. They were people looking for places to rent.
But is it because they got priced out of the market?
It could be. It could be, right? Like, I know there's these changes coming, like the 30-year amortization for the mortgages, 1.5 million, which isn't going to affect first-time home buyers on CMHC approvals. But there's nothing like, I don't know. There's nothing really happening to make it easier for first-time buyers to get into the market. I find a lot of the policies that come in make it a bit more difficult for them.
Those policies, I think, are more related to how people are going to vote, in particular people who already own their home and who don't want the price to plummet. I think the only real policy that has a material impact on this is how easy is it to build homes? How many can we build? So until we're addressing that, until we are adding all over Europe that 20-unit, 4-story, 5-story building, that's your bread and butter of housing people, right? Because it's the most cost-effective way to get a lot of people housing. And like we talked, that missing middle that we talked about, that doesn't exist. You can't get that built. It's way too expensive, way too difficult, whatever it is. And so I think the most important part is, how do we get more supply? That'll address the rent costs, the cost of housing. I think that really is going to address everything way more than 70-year amortizations or, God forbid, something like what happened in Australia, where I think their standard became interest-only mortgages.
Oh my God.
So like, you're just renting in different form for life. So I don't know. It's all about supply.
You don't see that supply. Like, you look across, like, I'm more of a Hamilton guy. I was like Hamilton skyline. When you look across Hamilton skyline, there's no new purpose-built rentals that you see popping up. Everything was a condo, but you don't really see these leasing units, right? I was in one yesterday, climbing around the other one's Remax. I was shooting for Cable 14 in a building that they put up down on Queenston. And he was even saying there was a huge hassle to get that approved, because then, they couldn't get 19 stories as a tower, so they had to knock some stories down, but then they were able to build wider, right? And then they fit more. But he's like, just the hurdles you had to jump through to provide housing. And then they even did, I think 20% of the building there is even affordable housing, so it matches that criteria that it's whatever the rent minus whatever the city determines, whatever the rate is, to make it affordable housing to do it, right? But you need people building that kind of stuff, and because you were even talking about, I think it was last time, there was a house, was it St. Catharines, or maybe it was Thorold, the person that had bought the 2 lots with the 2 semis or 2 houses, and he wanted to build something, they said no.
No, they said essentially, you can, if you take those 2 houses down on that new lot that you'd be able to build a duplex. So like, it didn't make any sense. And this is what I was talking about earlier. The zoning as it was written in the 80s, let's say, made perfect sense in the 80s. At these costs, I don't think it does. And this is exactly what's happening. So now that same lot, let's say, is approved for a lot more housing, which I think is going to be tremendous, because I'm sure you have a lot of clients who they're hitting their upper limit on something was considered a tear down 30 years ago.
First-time buyers, for sure. For sure. You got to think, you're looking at those bungalows on the Hamilton Mountain, the East Streets, the West Streets, even more expensive. But you're looking at these old 60s bungalows with grandma's carpet, pink carpeting, wallpaper, and you're paying close to $600 for these things, right? And
plus reno, plus mortgage costs. And what happens, and it happened for us personally, me and my wife, you have to take on so much debt that you end up, like, a huge chunk of your disposable income is just to get into your starter home. And I think people maybe don't think about how much of an impact that'll have on our economy 10, 20 years when everyone's disposable income is going towards interest payments. So it's a very important question. And what we talked about, actually, I know this has turned into a zoning thing, but what we talked about is, when we're missing the rental supply, that 10, 12 unit 6-unit even. People go into the single family as rentals, and then first-time home buyers suffer.
Yeah.
So if we can address the density issues, meaning nothing can get built above 2-3 units, we will also address the first-time home buyer dilemma of forcing, 30-year-olds into $1 million of debt for something that needs to be renovated because it's 50 years old.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And
So,
some of those properties could even come back into first-time home buyer territory because banks will use income from properties towards the qualification. Some use half, some use like whatever percentage it is of the rent.
market.
But it helps people qualify for mortgages, right? You might be able to get a little bit more or qualify into a house that has 2
Don't you
units.
think that's like that? And that's how we did it. So we had a tenant. But don't you think that's a compromise?
Oh, 100%.
Like
When
it's not a
is.
positive. It's
When did you buy your first house?
we bought the house in Burlington where we had a tenant. We bought it 2017,
Okay, so
2018.
that was actually probably one of the best times to buy in the last 10 years because 2015 we had the first little shoot up. We had a little bump. Rates went down and I think it was the 2s and people were going crazy.
Yeah.
And then they did a little bump up and then 17 was slow, but 18 was a really slow year in terms of sales.
Yeah, 17 was, but 18 I think, I mean,
We
but
saw it slow until it started to pick up end of 2019 and 2020.
but we were in the same position though. Like we spent 6 months with Alex Hill, taking us to places and just getting outbid on stuff that needed a full renovation. So we were in the same spot. We needed to do a full gut. We needed to borrow from everybody. Shout out to our parents for the help there. But it's very much affected us in our late 30s now still, because it's very difficult. So I agree. It's nice that the banks are accommodating. Now, if you have a rental unit, it'll help cover the mortgage cost. I think it is, though, what's the best way to describe it? It's a failing of this whole thing that we have to do that. We shouldn't. We've got the land, we've got the skills, we've got everything. So again, to bring it back to the positive, now that the zoning is changing, I think we are going to finally start realistically addressing these problems, not just saying, now we allow 50-year mortgages.
Yeah.
There was a reason they didn't allow 30-year amortizations, and it was to protect people. It wasn't because they didn't want you to get into debt, right? So especially when the federal government, I think they said that, the big changes they had, they are trying, I will say. They are doing an excellent job by trying things. It's very hard, but that stuff around expanding mortgage terms and stuff, that's not a solution. That's like we're bleeding. How do we stop the bleed temporarily kind of thing? Yeah.
No, banks must be loving it though. Like what bank's not going to want to say, hey, first time buyer, I'll get you in for 30 years. Let's go, right?
And I think that's the takeaway. Like get an nice ETF that holds Canadian banks. That works well, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, there is so much land around here. A lot of our land's obviously protected under the Golden Horseshoe and all that. We have that's why it's so hard to expand. And then we did have the expansion, then it got called back. But the land is there. There's so much development land around us that I don't know. I'm in support of expansion. I think density is important too because a lot of major cities have that density, right? But expansion doesn't hurt either.
I don't think we need it. So I think protecting the greenbelt is important. It is more important than what people realize. It would be a very easy lever to get rid of it. It's like saying housing is a problem in Manhattan. We should get rid of Central Park. Yes, it would help with the housing issue, but you're going to lose something very important and never get it back. So the greenbelt stuff, maybe it needs to be tightened up a little, but to get rid of it, I don't think we need that. Density really is the answer because it prevents, I think the term is urban sprawl or something, where it's just suburbs. And having grown up in Oakville, I'm very cognizant of it. If it's just a suburb, there's one bar or like you have to drive to your restaurants. It's like, it's not ideal. So I think density is the first lever, if still you haven't addressed it, okay, sure, let's discuss it. But I don't think we need to release all the protected land.
I don't want to say release all of it, but
Yeah.
let's push it a little bit out. Let's get a couple more blocks to build.
Yeah, and they have. But you see what happens.
Yeah.
4,000 square foot single family dwellings on 40-foot wide lots.
Or now it's the 3-story towns is the huge one, back to backs, just slamming them on as much as possible.
Which I'm a fan of.
Park and stuff.
I'm just not a fan of a single family 3,500 square foot home that a family with 4 generations has to buy to afford.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably see more of that in Oakville and Burlington. Like here,
Mississauga, Brampton.
Mississauga for sure. Oh my god, yeah. I was up in Mississauga yesterday in this beautiful house. But the it's Hamilton. We're very popular with the townhouses, the 3-story towns, the backs. We see a ton of that.
Yeah,
which
Hamilton is like the beachhead for all this stuff. Actually,
they
were first into how do we get more density? How do we get our ADUs going? I will give them that, and especially because they're dealing with so much in terms of cost spirals. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and they have been good because we've been seeing them pop up everywhere, right? And so you can help people with the ADUs, right? We should probably mention that too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to sell on these things.
Yeah,
I come for the.
You don't like to sell.
I come for the company.
Okay, I'll tell people to call you. Then.
Yeah. So, developing. So turning single family into multiple units. That has been quite popular in the last few months. Like we talked about, the numbers didn't make sense. Now they're starting to. So I think it is a very good option. Toronto actually it's unbelievable the change Toronto has experienced in terms of allowing more density. So 3 years ago, it was unimaginable in Toronto to add units. How would people ever walk, if it's 3 units versus 2 and all that? The changes happened and the units are fantastic. They're practical. Yeah, especially the ADUs with the 2 stories where you can do a 3-bedroom. So in terms of families actually having that option, fantastic. So yeah, we're definitely working with people a lot more on that side. And as interest rates come down, I think the numbers on it are going to be great. And that's what you have to have for people to really start doing a lot of it, because it is hard. It's hard to build this stuff out. It's a year-long process.
Expensive too.
It's expensive. So I think, the changes in the next year, I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. It's a good topic. It's always good having you on. Last few people, they come on, we talk about business stuff like that, but I'm loving this conversation because it's always a hot topic when you're talking about the crisis, especially in Hamilton, just because people feel like our prices shouldn't be anywhere near the price that they're at.
Yeah.
Our average price, which I honestly can't disagree with them.
I agree with it wholeheartedly.
When I think about what I paid for my first house, how lucky I was to be able to get it for what I did, where now you see these teardowns basically for what used to be a luxury home in Ancaster. You're now buying these 60s teardowns, right? And it's really disappointing to see that it went that route and it got so expensive, but we get a lot of influx from the GTA and stuff too. So hopefully at least these ADUs, like you said, will help bring a little more relief to people and relief to the market, and especially the rental market. Like our rents are increasing like crazy. That supply is almost worse than the supply for houses for people in Hamilton right now.
Exactly, right? So as soon as you allow more density and people can build those 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom units at a price that makes sense, they can rent them out at a price that makes sense, which means renters don't need to look for old single-family homes to rent. It's going to be a much better scenario. I'm hopeful, at least.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, we were talking a little bit about your business before too. So what are your plans moving forward with everything? Are you looking to expand? How are you right now with everything?
Yeah, last few months have been fantastic. I still don't know why, which has me a little worried because maybe it'll go away. But last few months, people have been really receptive. So the plan for this year is to try to help as many people as possible, particularly on the ADU side, and also give the team a little bit of a breather. We've been on a bit of a tear, so the staff is a little worn out, but I'm hoping we can smooth the plan. So from a business perspective, the plan now is to look how we can decrease the amount of work we do per project in terms of, like I mentioned, we're really good now at these things. So let's start to, the classic is when you first start, you put so much detail on a page that it just creates so many problems. So the plans examiner at the city has to spend triple the time reviewing. The contractors find it really hard. So what we've really worked on in the last few years, and I think we need to do more of, is only provide on the page exactly what's necessary. And that's hard. All right. So for you to know what the plans examiner needs, what the contractor needs, and provide nothing more is a talent that we're trying to work on. So that's the big goal for this year. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And then the more you do, the more you can streamline it, right? And I think in terms of being busy, like I know we kind of talked about it before, where people weren't really spending money to do renovations or do things in the past. 'Cause it's been 33 months since the rate started increasing.
Incredible. Yeah.
Right. And when you think about that, 33 months of uncertainty, people are thinking, okay, well, I don't know if I'm going to do this renovation, or maybe I'm just trying to get by and make my payments. I can barely afford my mortgage. Right. And I think people are getting antsy. Now we're starting to see the rates come down. Things are starting to
I suspect that's
get a bit of momentum back here.
I suspect that's the biggest change in the last few months. People see a little bit more certainty, at least in knowing that interest rates are coming down. And because a lot of people finance their renovations on the line of credit,
Yes.
which is variable, right? So it had a huge impact on the cost of projects. We're seeing very excited people now who get to, again, do what they were planning in terms of renovating their home. We see a lot of couples who are moving in. And in particular, right now, we're working with someone where they were in the same spot I was, where his wife is pregnant, and they're hoping to get this renovation done before the baby comes, so that they can, have their home
Under the gun.
ready. Yeah, so that's been my favorite, just because it relates to us personally.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of people like that, and it's great. It's really nice.
That's awesome.
To see that back.
What's
Yeah.
kind of the biggest challenges you guys are facing right now?
Biggest challenge is getting everything out on time, um, because we've taken on more work. I really want to be respectful to people in terms of how long a project takes. And it also, so not only are it's not fair for clients to take a long time, it also is really hard on the team. So when we have to juggle a bunch of, I think right now we're working on like 20 projects or something like that. And it gets a little scary when you have to like constantly push. So that's the current challenge today. I think just having a bit more time to standardize the process is going to be really important. But yeah.
Yeah, there's always that saying that I live by is like, because I'm very big on goal setting. I always set goals every year, and then I just,
Yeah.
go to, but what I've learned is you have to put it like you have to systemize everything to get to that point. It's a saying from, I think it's from the Atomic Habits book, which is one of my favorite books, is like, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems.
Yeah.
And it's like, when you talk about systemizing things, I feel like that could be such a game changer for anybody in any business in terms of the flow, and then being able to grow, because that it's once you have the system, you spend less time doing that. You have a streamlined process.
I've been shocked at how difficult that is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of help or a lot of advice, and I actually got a coach. I think they're called accountability coaches, and trying to actually systemize stuff so that it's practical is very hard. So we spent a lot of time using Zapier and trying to automate stuff, and then something breaks or something needs to be different for one project and it doesn't work and it falls. So I'd love your take on like what you've done successfully from a system standpoint, because I find that it's a great concept. Implementing it is very difficult, particularly like version control and all that kind of stuff.
See, for you, it might be different, like for me, I've automated pretty much every aspect of my business other than my client interactions, or that's real interactions, right? But from the minute, like say we get a listing, the minute we get a listing in my CRM, they get dragged over to a certain spot. It populates a checklist for my administrator to go through. She follows through the checklist. They also get automated emails of saying, hey, this is what's next. Expect this, expect that, right? And then same with list day. We have these automated emails that go out, they drip. And that goes through the whole process, but the checklists are huge for
But how did you learn that, though?
auto-populating.
Like, who set that up for you?
So I use a CRM. I think they're real estate specific. It's called Follow Up Boss.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. It's like $300 US a month for me and my team. But it's worth it because it allows us to do that. But the system was just like, the way that I thought of it was, anytime we got asked a question and I started getting the question more than once, I'm thinking, okay, how do I not get asked this question anymore?
Right.
And then I'm like, do I need to make an auto email when we list? Because people are like, oh, maybe we list, and just they might message me again about details about the open house. So now, okay, if we list and we know you're doing an open house, boom, you're going to get an email. Hey, here's everything you need to know for Sunday. And then that's taken care of. Before closing, we send out that, right? And then I'm starting to do conversions. Now we're filming videos of me telling this stuff in video. Like we were talking about how important video is, instead of just the actual text. So that then you have that next level of like communication, but the text will still be there because not everybody wants to watch me talk for a minute or two. But it's so just systemizing that kind of stuff. But our whole closing process, everything is completely automated. Like once somebody closes, we have it automated that they get sent boxes, tape, packing materials from Home Depot delivered to their door. Like, hey, congratulations, here's some stuff to start packing with. On closing, they get a gift card to Uber Eats so they can order something in, so they don't have to worry about.
And this is done
getting
through
dinner.
that software?
So no, this is my admin.
Or that's
It's part
you
of her checklist.
personally?
It's my admin checklist. Yeah. So I'm really good at delegation. I've made my role to be one, like selling listings and generating new business and managing the business and client interactions, like the face-to-face. That's what I love most about the business. I hate the tedious, and then you'll forget stuff if you don't have the checklist. But then I found, even if the checklist relied on me, then, you know, when I'm busy, I might let it fall off.
That's the part I struggle with.
And so I trust my administrator. She's fantastic with everything, and she executes it very well. And it's been life-changing. It allows you to grow then, right? Because then you can focus on doing the tasks you want. And the most important task, which is trying to get new business, right? That's where I spend a large portion of the first 3 hours of my day, is just trying to generate new business. So, because now I don't have to worry about, oh, I got to send this, do this, I got to put documents here or there, or did we do this? Did I do that for that deal? Now it's like, I know everything's happening. I can go at any point and check to see, has it been done? But some people use like Monday.com is one like task thing. I think the people you do, there's like a million of them.
We've tried a few task things and it just feels like make work. You know what's interesting though? My specialization in school was systems design on the engineering side, but I've just found it really difficult. Like we implement whatever the best practice is supposed to be, and then after a few months, the team is like, "This sucks. Like this is so tedious. Like I don't know why we have to do this," and I like agree with them. Like it's painful. So maybe I need someone to change my perspective on that.
Well, it's anything that somebody like doesn't need an engineering license to do. You should just be offloading it to.
Yeah, but that sounds good. Actually implementing that is like
business.
I don't know why. Maybe I'm making it hard, but it's like there's edge cases, or like you have to stay on top of it, or I don't know. When I had the ice cream shop, actually, that it was a lot easier to do that.
You had an ice cream shop?
You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, in Oakville downtown.
What was it?
You know the Marble Slab? On Lakeshore?
I don't know that one in particular, but I've heard of Marble Slab.
So the Marble Slab in downtown Oakville, I ran that for, I want to say 5 years.
Wow.
Something like that, And then we moved to Switzerland, so I had to sell it. But I think it worked a lot better there because, like, you know, it's crazy high volumes and stuff, so you get to optimize stuff. But in this business, I've just found it really, really hard to automate.
Each case is different. Each municipality is different. It's almost like you have to systemize like each job with each municipality.
Then it gets to the point where it's like so much special case stuff where it's like, okay, we'll just not use.
We'll just figure it out.
We'll just not
There's
use
got to
the
be some stuff. It's like, it's funny you said the systems. It's always like the landscaper has the worst yard. He has like the worst lawn of the neighbor.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe that's it. So
The electrician.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a goal for this year. Kind of figuring out how to help the team. Because like you said, there's a lot of, it's not even admin. I don't know what you'd call it. It's like we prepare our report and then you have to print from this software and then insert it into here. And then,
But that sounds like admin work to me. Print it from
know.
here, add it in there.
no, but it's, yeah,
Here's a template. Save the template. Save this. Create a checklist.
I got
You know how I train my
I need your
admin?
help with that.
Whenever I do anything, I screen record what I'm doing.
Okay.
And I just talk because I have that's you can use. I think Loom is free.
Yeah.
And you just talk and record. And I'm like, okay, today I'm going to fill out a listing. And then I just fill out the listing, talk about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then she can go back. She has an hour-long video, step by step of how to do it. She can pause the video. She can go back. She can.
Yeah.
So I train her everything that I want her to do. I'll do it myself. And then I only have to do it once. And then if I ever get a new admin or onboard a second admin,
Yeah.
the training manuals, the video is there. It's already created because I just did it once.
Yeah.
I'm doing it anyways. May as well record it. And if so, that was an easy way. And then, but I might actually have her start putting together like a manual, like a legit manual instead of these like videos, like the library that I have, or maybe making a library out of them. I don't know.
Yeah. That's a great idea. But that's a big challenge that I want to tackle this year.
Yeah.
To answer your question from 20 minutes ago.
I love it. I love it. We're cracking the hour mark, I think. Last question. If you had to go back to when you first started your company, what is some advice that you would give yourself?
Advice? I think, yeah, that's really hard because I don't know if you found this, but, and like the longer I am in this type of role, the more I see other entrepreneurs in the same boat. And it is much harder than you initially estimate. Like several times more difficult with a lot more cold sweats than you'd expect. So I'm not sure I'd want to talk to myself. Like, I don't know how I wouldn't scare them to death
Yeah.
of like, hey, just so you know, the next several years are going to be rough.
The ignorance is almost
You need it.
good though, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. So maybe I wouldn't say anything. I mean, in hindsight, like you'd make changes based on how the world actually turned out. But yeah, I always think about that. Like, would you take this on if you knew how, like,
What it was
and
gonna
you
be.
didn't know? So for me, it was particularly challenging. We got up to 10 people in February of 2019 or whenever COVID hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2020.
So February of 2020, we got up to 10 people in the office, 10 laptops, 10 softwares, 10 whatever. And then COVID hit and our biggest account said, hey, as of Tuesday, we don't have any more work for you guys. And like just going through that. So like we talked about, training people, I find really difficult. So we held on to everybody for like the 8-10 months because you don't want to let go of people during COVID, but also like it's really important to keep a good team. And I didn't know how long it would last. So let's just say I hemorrhaged money to do that. And in hindsight, because it lasted much longer and everything was way harder, that was obviously a huge detriment, especially to my savings and all of that. But yeah, I don't know. What's the advice? Go, just go do it. Don't worry about it. But it turns out that everyone has very similar stories.
Yeah.
The first few years, someone who was super successful was telling me like, yeah, I had to go work nights somewhere and not tell the staff just so I could cover their
Wow.
their costs. And I was like, oh wow, like I didn't even think about that. Like I just wiped out my savings, but
People don't realize it. And I think when you get into the business, you always have these great intentions of what you want to do, but then you don't realize how much work actually goes into it. And even today, you're probably doing so much work that if somebody wanted to be in your position, that's where you were 10 years ago, they'd probably look at your day-to-day activities and be like, I can't do that. I'm like, oh my God,
that's what I said. I said, this is wild. What am I doing?
Yeah.
One piece of advice that I would in hindsight, let's say, is first grow the sales, then the team. I always wanted to, because especially on the engineering side, it's a lot of knowledge and a lot of training. I always wanted to have the team one step ahead of our sales. And the sales component is much harder than I realized. So I think that might have really helped me in terms of the sleepless nights. First grow the sales, then expand the team. It's unpleasant, but the converse is even more.
Yeah, sales solves
unpleasant.
everything.
Yeah.
It solves any issue with sales when the revenue comes in.
Yeah.
But no, that's awesome. This has been great.
Yeah.
It's been a really good interview. Thanks again for coming on.
I love
We'll
it.
maybe have to have you on every year just to follow up, see what's going on.
No,
with,
let's do 8 months.
every 8 months.
8 months. That's
We'll
enough change.
book it now. Put it in our calendars.
Yeah.
Everybody else, thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, be sure to click on the video over here. It is going to allow you to watch the last episode we did and any previous episodes. And I look forward to talking to you all again soon. Take care.